Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Branch Hatch 200 km 50th anniversary special endurance race. We are here tonight at Brands Hatch commemorating the 50th anniversary of Alfa's victory at the Brands Hatch 1000 kilometres. We're obviously running a much shorter race in commemoration, driving the legendary Tipo 33 Double T12. It is a fabulous race car, 500 horsepower back on 1970s tyres. It's going to be fun to watch the drivers wrestle it round during qualifying, which we'll be joining in just a moment. And the drivers we have tonight, it's quite an interesting setup really. We've got teams, and the drivers must each run 50% of the race distance of that car each. So we have Colin Knief and Steve Knight. We have Matt Daly and Guy Swarbrick running together. We have Andrew Whitehead and John Baker. We have Andrew Craker and Rob Whitney. We have Greg Young and Will Inglis. We have Alan Matthews and Will Harper. We have Luke Wiggins and Anthony Gray. And Alex Smith and George Brook. So they're the drivers for tonight. You could potentially, for example, run 25 laps and swap over, just as long as by the end of this race you've both completed 50% race distance. You are allowed to do what you want with the stints. So in just a moment we'll be joining the qualifying action. And here we are, with just 17 minutes of qualifying to go. We are on board with Luke Wiggins and Anthony Gray in their car. Lovely livery on this Tipo 33 here. We are around Brands Hatch, the full layout, obviously trying to exercise the very powerful engines in these cars. Top speeds of up to 205 miles an hour in this thing, so it's certainly going to be a leery one. They have set a lap time of 1:25.1. Unfortunately, my time screen isn't working at the moment. I'll try and get that figured out in just a second for you. But in the meantime, let's have a little more of a discussion about this car. It comes from 1973. It was driven by famous drivers such as Jack Lafitte and Jochen Mass, Derek Bell, for example. Only about 670 kilos. So this will be a leery one. It's pretty much it says a V12, and it is a V12, but it's a very, very low slung V12, about 180 degrees. Yeah, this will be a challenging car. This definitely will be a challenging car because we're still running on the 1970s tyres. Today, I will try and get this timing issue resolved as quickly as possible and join you with the action as soon as possible. So we've got a little bit of traffic here in qualifying. Unfortunately, I can't switch the camera because that relies on the timing screen system there, but we can see a few cars barreling around this corner now with Luke and Ant. I'm not sure who's in the car at the moment. This is something I will find out in just a second with the little interlude while I repair this system. But we can see a bit of slow traffic out in front there. They're just about avoiding contact. And he will be able to, I'm sure, run around for a clean lap in just a second. About 50 minutes to go, so plenty of time for the drivers to get a good lap in. Of course, this is an endurance event, so qualifying is by no means everything. As long as you keep the nose clean within the first couple of laps, you can be on for a fairly decent result, it must be said. And obviously manage the tyres and the car well for into the race. Obviously, this being a setter, we do have damage enabled, and drivers will be trying to maintain that, and trying to maintain a 1970s Alfa Romeo engine as well, so that'll be one that I'll have to watch out for, I imagine. As you can see, the revs rising there up to about 11,000 RPM on Luke and Ant's car. 123.8, their quickest laps so far, so very good job to them so far. We'll be joining the action in just a moment. unfortunately haven't got all the issues resolved for the moment, but we are on board here with Greg and Will as they come to set another quick lap. They have a 123.1 to be, and unfortunately this won't be this time with the 126.2. That was Matt Daly setting pole there, I believe, just a moment ago. On board then with Andrew Whitehead and John Baker. As that sector hasn't quite gone their way so far, as we've got just over 10 minutes of qualifying remaining, as we have Greg Young and Will Inglis rejoining the session. Oh, bit of an error there from Andrew Whitehead and John Baker as they go off on the final corner there. That will, luckily, it's a perfect opportunity to dive back into the pit, so not all is lost. They've still got plenty of time to make some repairs to the car and get the car back out in quali. Board with them. Not quite sure who this is, unfortunately, but they are onto the Brabham Straight now. It is. We have Andrew Craker and Rob Whitney here. Headlights on, prepared for a night race almost. And as we dive into this, I imagine I will learn the liveries and won't have to rely on the time screen to tell me who is who. But we can see out in front there, we have Alex Smith and George Brook. Oh, a bit of an error there. Is that from, I believe that's from the car of Andrew Cricket and Rob Whitney. Not quite sure where this is at the moment. We got someone else that's on track now, heading into the hairpin. Yeah, unfortunately, obviously, the liveries being a replica of the real-life variants, I can't quite make out who is currently in the car at the moment. Both drivers of the team are allowed to qualify, as we've got just under 10 minutes remaining now. This is typical of my streaming setup, of course. This happened beforehand, and I'm sure will happen many times in the future, as we see someone going off there. I believe that was Alex and George. This is typical of my streaming setup to fail on the night of an endurance event of all things. What I could really do with the timing system to be at its best to work out where the drivers are in terms of the race. I'm sure we'll get this sorted, though, as we head into the race in just about 15 minutes' time. Board with Alan Matthews and Will Harper then, heading through the hill bend. That's a very cool camera angle as we just see as we head onto Pilgrim's Rise. Unfortunately, we're going to leave the action there. I'm going to go on board with Greg Young and Will Inglis as they head through the Clark Curve and onto the Brabham Straight. Fortunately, not the time that they needed for the moment. It's a 128.9. That puts them into 5th position. You can see the car really wringing the neck in the car as he dips onto the gravel a little bit, having just completed his fast lap. on board with Alan Matthews and Will Harper as they start their quick lap then. Through the hill bend, we're going to join Luke Wiggins and Anthony Gray. Coming to the end of the lap now, as we head through the clock curve and onto the Brabham Straight. They're looking to try and beat that 123.1. They do with a 123 dead. That's pole position for Luke Wiggins and Anthony Gray for the moment, with just over 5 minutes remaining. It's a very nice lap from them indeed. I'm sure it's going to be putting Matt Daly and Guy Swarbrick under some pressure. We are back now with Alan Matthews and Will Harper heading onto the Derek Miller Straight. Through Westfield, taking as bad or much curb as he dares, really. He wants to keep the car clean in preparation for the main event. Heading through Sterling's then. Fabulous corner, very complex. You've got to make sure you get absolutely nail the braking point here, because things would go very wrong if you don't. Into clearways, and you lose a lot of time, and through the clock curve. Again, a very technical part of the track. Very easy to just understeer straight into that huge gravel trap. But we're going to come onto the Brabham Straight now and see what time Alan... unfortunately, I don't know if that's... a time screen error there, but it wasn't timing that lap. I believe that was their quick lap. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to make out what time they set there. That's a great shame. It looked very nice indeed towards the end there. And we have the return of Colin Knief and Steve Knight. Let's see what lap time they can set. Unfortunately, we're not going to join them for the action just for a moment because I didn't click the automatic disable button in time. That was my mistake there. But I'm sure we'll catch that before the end of the lap. And we're going to catch the end of Andrew Right Ahead and John Baker's lap. As they head through the clock curve, an interesting blue livery there on their car. Very nice indeed. Loving some of these retro liveries, it must be said. And a very nice lap there, 123.7. I'm sure they'll be pleased with that. That puts them into second position as Matt and Guy's client disconnects. So it will technically put them in first, but for the race, that will be second position for the moment. I'm sure they will be hoping to reconnect in an attempt to take back that pole position. In fact, the fact that that's just given Andrew pole position must mean that Matt himself had managed to steal back pole position just before the end of the lap there. Just before he disconnected there, rather. And we see Matt and Guy Swarbrick reconnecting there as we enter the final few minutes of qualifying now. I'm going to stay on board with Alex Smith and George Brook as they cross the line as they decide to terminate that lap just before the checkered flag. I'm sure that was intentional. I'd be very surprised if it wasn't, because that was quite an odd place to come to a stop there. We're on board then with Alan Matthews and Will Harper. Their previous best being a 127 that has them in fourth position. So that 123 flat is still on pole position for the moment, and it looks like it is going to be a 127 again. Fourth position again, a 127.5. That's got them high up. It's in the lower half of the 7 teams we have with us today. But of course, this being an endurance event qualifying, it could be fair game by the end of lap 1. It could be a huge error out in front that sees 3 drivers out, and it sees people who were further down the grid fighting for the front all of a sudden. So it's anyone's game, this long 200-kilometer event. It looks like his... There we go. I think just another small error with the timing screens there that had me in a car for a second. Don't worry, I'm not commentating and driving at the same time. My driving isn't good enough as it is. The camera at the moment has an affinity for Andrew and Rob. It's enjoying their outlaps. They warm up their tyres in preparation for what must be the final hot lap of the session now for them. See a bit of a lock up there. It's not ideal, but it shouldn't have affected the warm-up too badly. Of course, these 70s tyres, very tricky to get into a decent window. Just we don't have the technology and the compounds that we enjoy today. So there will be a challenge to not only get some pace out of them, but get some longevity out of them as well. These cars, 500 horsepower going to the rear wheels, and not much weight at all. Be really stressing those tyres quite hard. Especially the rears, I can imagine. They're fairly wide, but you know, there's hardly much finesse in these old brutes, these old machines here. Not much torque, though, obviously this being an old-school racing engine. Into the final minutes of qualifying session then, on board with Alex Smith and George Brooke in third position at the moment. As they, just in the nick of time, get ready to start their final hot lap of the session. We'll stay on board with them. It's a very cool Martini liveried car. The number 12 car, must be said. Heading into Druids. See a car behind, either preparing... No, that must be an in lap for the car behind there, but heading into the Cooper Straight now. Very nice sector one for them there. 2/10 off the very best. Come down onto Pilgrim's Drop them so we can really exercise all 500 of these old school horsepower. Nearly 200 miles an hour. We're probably hitting around 160, 170 around Brands Hatch here. Not the largest circuit in the world. Very technical. And it will test these drivers in this long endurance event then. 3/10 off in that sector. Still on for a decent lap for this endurance event then. See the car fidgeting around with the braking. Tricky, tricky cars to master these. Heading towards Clark Curve then. And once again, trying to eke out as much power as possible. As we cross the line with a 123.8 or 123.9 pretty much. That gives them second position. A very nice starting position for Alex Smith and George Brooke indeed. A couple of victory celebratory wiggles with the steering there. I'm not sure you want to be doing that too much in an old school car, but very well deserved indeed. That will put them in a very nice position for the start of this endurance event. Now, in the gap, I will try and make sure that the timing screens are ready and working for this long 200-kilometer event. It should be a very good one indeed with these cars. I hope you're looking forward to it because I am. Unfortunately, the lights are about to go out, and the game hasn't quite detected. Right, we are away for. Oh dear, big spin for. He managed to catch it. This has just become a radio broadcast all of a sudden. It's gone spectacularly well for the very start, as it looks like there. I'm trying to make out who that is. Unfortunately, Andrew and Rob were on pole position for the moment and have conceded the position to. Well, luckily we have a timing system back, which is very nice. So Matt Daly and Guy Strawberry are currently in the lead. This is Matt Daly in the car at the moment. He is about 3/10 already ahead of the car behind, who is followed by and. So a couple of issues with the timing system nonetheless, but we will carry on. It's Luke and Anthony Gray just behind for the moment. I'm not quite sure who's in the car, unfortunately. We'll see a close battle going for second position at the moment, and Carl's phasing a big crash indeed. I believe some lag involved in that if it's done that. Unfortunately, that has taken me out of the timing. Oh, not quite sure what's gone on there. It is known that a setter does struggle when you've got multiple drivers sharing the same car. In fact, the server, not sure if the server has crashed on my end or on the server side, unfortunately. So some technical issues at the start of our 200-kilometer event. I believe it is on the server side owing to the fact that the stream is still going. So I'm sure we'll get those resolved as quickly as possible. We'll be back with you in just a moment. Unfortunately, following the corrections to the server just made then, I was a little bit slow getting back into the session over to some computer issues, which is always just technical issues galore today, but we are back with the action now. We're still on lap 1. Matt Daly is still leading at the moment. About a second and a half gap towards Alex Smith and George Brook in the car at the moment. Followed again about half a second and a half by Andrew Whitehead and Rob Whitney. In fact, no, that may be Andrew Craker. Apologies there. Greg Young and Will Inglis in 4th. About half a second behind, we have Andrew Whitehead and John Baker. In 6th, we have a swap for position there as Colin Knief and Steve Knight, unfortunately. Big error there that sees them in the gravel trap. We have Luke Wiggins and Anthony Gray in 7th position, and Alan Matthews and Will Harper in 6th. So, the leader by no means in the clear at the moment. About 2 seconds. We've got a long way to go. We've got 50 laps. And what will be quite a important part of this race, as we see Matt Daly exploring track limits there just ever so slightly. A little bit on the grass. Not sure you want to do that too many times. We have Andrew and John gaining there on Greg Young and Will Harper. Or Will Inglis, rather. Well, we've got lots of repeat names, and we see down the straight then, a little bit of an advantage, just eking out of just like he dips onto the grass, so it won't help him too much. He's going to try and make it around the outside, and he does indeed. He's very brave under braking there, and he takes 4th position. Well done to him there. Matt Daly's lead shrunk just a little bit out in front now. Actually, no, it's returned to about the same. Never mind that, but some people behind on some very quick laps now. The tyres, of course, brand spanking new. But yeah, the strategy will be very important here because there's 2 mandatory driver's drops, in fact. So drivers will try to play to their own strengths and put themselves in the car when they feel necessary. As we head through the Clark curve then, and Matt Daly out in front starts a new lap with 1:24.5 as the best at the moment. That's a very good lap indeed with that much fuel on board. I know some drivers have already told me the strategies, which is very nice indeed. We have George in the car at the moment. For George and Alex, he'll be doing the first 25 laps, and then they'll be performing the mandatory stop and swapping before a final swap towards the end again. So at 2 seconds between them and Matt Daly out in front for the moment. It is Matt Daly in the car. Guy Swarbrick will be joining in the next mandatory stop, and I'm not sure what's happened there actually. It's saying that I'm not sure if has Matt Daly received a penalty. About 160 miles an hour reached by Matt Daly then, but it currently has George out in front, and it's just swapped back again. Maybe a little bit of lag getting involved there. We can see drivers still putting pressure on each other. We have we have Andrew Whitehead and John Baker chasing the car of Andrew Craker and Rob Whitney. Less than a second between them as we head onto the straight now. Very quick lap from Matt Daly there, indeed. A 1:23.5 rather, and has been closely followed by a very fast 1:23.8. So the leaders really putting on a good show at the moment as we enter the 4th lap of the race, and a little bit of an error coming in from Matt Daly there. He just dipped the car onto the grass ever so slightly. That won't be ideal. That has allowed George to catch up behind quite quickly, it must be said. George obviously new to our championships as we head into the second half of this year. Welcome to him. We hope we have some good racing with him and from some more new people. About half a second separating these two then as we head through Pilgrim's Drop, the fastest part of the circuit. You'll be enjoying the slipstream there, and probably enjoying it just a little bit less as we head through the technical section with Westfield. As these cars obviously, you see the massive aero on the rear, they'll be chucking air here, there and everywhere, and it won't be ideal in terms of putting downforce on the car behind. But he's putting pressure now about half a second behind, as is 4th position Andrew and John. On 3rd position Rob Whitney and Andrew Craker. We head through Clark Curve then. Andrew is right on the tail of, I'm just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to call them Rob for the moment, just so we have two different names going on. But as we start the next lap between these two drivers, they are pretty much neck and neck and heading into the hill bend. He has dropped back just a little bit. Oh, no, he hasn't. We got... Apologies there, I was looking at the wrong car, but as we head through Druids, then they are side by side pretty much. Andrew defending well there, keeping third position for himself just for the moment. And as we head through the Cooper Straight, he will have dropped back ever so slightly. We see the car in fifth position there. Don't know if that's an intimidation tactic. He's got the headlights on. And Matt Daly has been able to keep George behind just for the moment. About a second now between the two cars as we once again head down the straight. My apologies, I've just realised that we have... I was wondering, where's the... it's not normal for me to hear the cars, but I'm just wondering, where's the screaming V12's gone? We will fix that in just a moment, but we're going to stay with the battle. I'm not quite sure if you guys are actually getting engine audio, and I do apologise for that if that is the case. We have about 2 tenths separating these two cars now as we head through Clark Curve. Again, they have been putting pressure on each other, it must be said, for the past couple of laps now. Very good job indeed. They're going to be side by side as we head onto the next lap now then, and through the hill bend. In fact, we've got a bit of an error coming through for Andrew and Rob there. Just a little bit of oversteer through the hill bend. That must be very scary indeed. Of course, the track kind of dips away from you, and the gravel and the wall get ever closer onto that intense braking zone. And it looks like the rear end just wasn't entirely happy, and he has now conceded that position, now conceded the bottom spot of the podium to the car out in front. Very well held. And this race will in fact be in changeable conditions. It won't be weather, but it will be time. We have had a 3 PM race start, and we will be enjoying a beautiful sunset here at Brands Hatch. So that'll be very nice to see indeed. I look forward to that. That'll put a little bit of pressure on the drivers towards the end. Got to keep their concentration up and find that headlight switch, in fact, as Andrew and John come across some lapped traffic then, who gets out of the way nicely. Out in front then, nearly 2 seconds now separating Matt Daly from George. So he has eked out a little bit of a lead. See, 11,000 RPM there. Unfortunately, not hearing it just at the moment. I will solve that in just a second. A very nice lap there from 124.1. He is keeping good pace, given we are now kind of getting... finding a rhythm, getting into the race now that all the drivers will be finding a rhythm and start to kind of progress through their own race. And this is when the strategy starts to play in a few laps' time. And I will take this opportunity. It's I was about to say small laps in action, but unfortunately for our third place runners, there has been a big error. That now sees them in 6th position and promotes Andrew Robb back onto the podium positions. That's not the type of error that you want to be seeing this early on in an endurance event, and unfortunately that has relegated them quite far down now. Now, this only being 7 laps in, all of the grid is fairly close together, so if they demonstrate some good pace, as they've shown at the start of the event, I am sure that they are still well within contention for a good result. But it's little mistakes like that that can add up quite a lot in longer events like this. Some lap traffic out in front, 155 miles an hour for the car there, so very quick indeed down the quick section of the track. So Alex and George still out in 2nd position, have kept it clean. No mistakes crept in so far. But unfortunately for them, no mistakes have crept in for the very quick, as we know, our double champion for the first half of the year's running, Matt Daly, who is in the car at the moment. 123.6, once again, very quick lap indeed. 8 laps into the 50. As Andrew and Rob set their personal best there at 124.3. So after that mistake that we saw a few laps ago, they are now once again in a rhythm, running nicely. And I do apologise for the particularly quiet first few laps of this endurance event, and the qualifying as well, which wouldn't have the audio either. I don't believe so anyway. But we should now have some in-game audio running once again. Here those V12s, 180 degree V12 making about 500 horsepower. It's only about a 3 litre, screaming to around 11,500 RPM, I believe. You probably can rev them higher, but I'm not sure you'd want to, really, in such a long event. 200 kilometres these engines have got to last, and as I'm sure many of us know, in the old days of racing, 200 kilometres was a lot to ask. So for Matt Daly then, that lap. Only a couple of green sectors, green mini sectors, but nonetheless, very nice lap, a 124.1 at this stage in the race. He has got a nice advantage out front, and I'll tell you who is running very quickly indeed. It is Andrew and Rob in third position at the moment. They have just put it very nicely in the 123s. We saw the back end getting a little bit snappy out of the hill bend there and into Druids now. We'll see that much more reserved that time round as he dips onto the curb just a little bit. We head onto the Cooper Straight. Yeah, it looks like there's a lot of rear end rotation on that car, in fact. That'll be something that they will be wanting to manage as we head into the later stages of this race, because that will start eating tyres away. Of course, there are 2 pit stops to replenish wearable items like that, but it's quite a quick way to lose time in an endurance event is to start really hammering your car. There's a lot to be said for maintaining a decent pace, but looking after the car nicely. See about a 3-second lead now for Matt Daly out in front. He is setting himself up very nicely as we head further into the race then, and I'm sure Guy Swarbrick will be thanking him as he prepares himself to step into the car. Guy's actually sent me some very, very useful information, as he so correctly points out. This back in the 70s was a 1,000 kilometre event, so these engines had to extend out much more than the 200 we're running today, and I'm sure there were plenty of retirements from that event. See, actually, it's quite a battle going on for 5th position, as following that earlier error, Andrew and John are looking, as we could go side by side through Druids there. It was a little bit risky, and onto the Cooper Straight then. He will be right in the slipstream of, as we see a little bit of an error come from Greg and Will there, a little bit of oversteer. That's not what we want to be doing when you're under such pressure from the car behind. We've seen some very good pace from Andrew and John at the moment, but we're going to head onto Pilgrim's Drop then. They are side by side. It looks like Greg has defended just enough, and it's going to force Andrew John to go around the outside, but it worked. Very brave under braking there, and on through Hawthorne, he actually managed to make it stick, so very good job to him indeed. Heading through Westfield then, with Greg behind. He's already back up into 5th position then. He's got about 6 seconds to the car out in front, but as we've seen, I am sure, will make quick work of that and try to be defending the podium positions towards the end of this race, in fact. Onto the Brabham Straight then, and Andrew and John have built themselves up a nice little gap. It could disappear quite quickly if there's mistakes through the technical corners like the hill bend there. But we saw them side by side through Druids last lap, and it's not going to be quite the same situation this time round, but it could very easily be. We've seen these cars are tricky beasts to handle. And we saw, despite their quick pace, mistakes did creep in for Andrew and John, so it could very easily happen again, and Greg and Will could find themselves soon back in 5th position. Still only about a sec, and the mistake just like that will do it, in fact. Looks like that was through Surtees there. Just went a little bit wide. Maybe a little bit of understeer or just a bit too late on the brakes. And now through Pilgrim's Drop, there will be a bit more slipstreaming from Andrew and John again. Heading through Hawthorne. This time it's Greg out in front. Andrew diving back into the slipstream there as we head towards clearways. It's probably the last big straight that you really want to be trying to battle someone into, because you've got the Clark curve coming up in just a second, and of course a huge gravel trap. Looks like he was exploring it under braking there in the rear view mirror, or maybe that was his car getting twitchy. You see about 11,500 RPM down the Brabham Straight, and it is Greg and Will still out in front for the moment as we head through the Paddock Hill bend. Then very nice line taken by Greg and Will, defending while also carrying quite a bit of speed, it must be said. And Andrew and John are going to try down the outside though through Druids. It didn't look like that worked. It looked like they were forced a little bit wide. And this is the type of battling that usually you want to try and avoid in an endurance event, as you want to try and keep your lap times good and you want to try and keep cars behind far behind. But this is very exciting action indeed. As we head through Surtees now, it's still Greg and Will out in front for the moment. But there's an immense amount of pressure on them as we head down Pilgrim's Drop. We should see the indicator there, letting Greg know, and very brave under braking there for Andrew and John, taking back 5th position through Hawthorne Bend. That was just a cracking move, it must be said. A lot of trust in the brakes there from Andrew and John. As we head through Westfield, it will be Andrew and John out in front for the moment, but as we've seen, these two can battle each other quite hard. We've seen throughout the year in the TCR series, and we've also seen so far in this race. About 13 laps in now, the pit window is open. We've got 10 laps for the drivers to make their changes to the car, to the driver lineup. And it looks like P4, Alan and Will be the first to dive into the pits, do their drive swap, maybe put on a fresh set of rubber, although it's only 13 laps in. They may not want to just yet. There might be a bit of life left in him for now. Out in front then, Matt Daly, running for both Matt and Guy. He's got about 6 seconds out in front. He's been running nicely these past few laps, just very consistent, very quick lap times. Exactly the type of driving you need for an endurance event. And they have themselves a comfortable little window out in front, as we see Alan and Will escaping the pits now, out in 7th position for the moment. Obviously, it's a fairly long pit in these older cars at this circuit in an endurance event. It's not the usual F1 pit stops that so many of us are used to seeing. Meanwhile, battle for 4th, or what was the battle for 5th, now the battle for 4th continues on. As Greg Young is by no means losing sight of Andrew and John out in front, and it's Matt Daly. Matt Daly, our leader, is now pitting. And will be preparing to do a driver swap. Swapping in Guy Swarbrick. And we have Alex and George running second, so the leaders of the race firmly deciding that now is the time to pit. Now is the optimum time to get a different driver in, so that we can have a driver swap towards the end of the race again for that final stint. So this middle stint now is when the race kind of settles down. The drivers find the rhythm again. Find out how the tyres and the fuel are lasting, and they probably want to keep it a bit cleaner than they did at the start of the race. Not that this has been messy by any means. Of course, we had that false start owing to some server glitches, and in fact we missed the very start of this race, which once again I apologise for, but you got to see the start of the race. It was just not the one that we're currently enjoying at the moment. So following the pit stops, it is Andrew and Rob who are out in front. Of course, we saw that mistake earlier at the hill bend, a little bit of oversteer for them that lost them podium position. Of course, they gained that back following Andrew and John's mistake. But 3rd position then has now been promoted into 1st, and now is when a good bit of strategy might come into play. If Andrew and Rob can put in some very quick laps indeed, they can maybe extend this stint for a little bit, give them a bit more tyre, a bit more fuel towards the end of the race, and give them a decent gap to pit in now. It's about 12 seconds at the moment. Let's see if that gap increases as the laps tick over. Matt and Guy still in the pits. Colin and Steve entering the pits now. We still have Matt and Guy in the pits, actually. This pit stop's gone on a little longer than the others that we've seen so far. Maybe taken on board some fuel. They could have been running some low fuel at the start of the race there. But still, Andrew and Rob out in front. They've kept that kind of 12-second gap, 12.5 seconds. Very quick car in a straight line, Andrew and Rob have. We see 161 miles an hour in the speed trap at the end of Pilgrim's Drop. That must be one of the quickest of the events, and maybe that's why we saw that oversteer creep in just a little bit. Only 8 laps of the pit window left for the moment. See, Guy Sawbrick now out in the car, running 7th position at the moment. So the previous leaders had quite a long pit stop. They may be looking to go long in this stint, or they may be looking for a shorter pit stop towards the end of the race. But we've seen some good pace from this car so far. And of course, with 8 runners at the moment, I'm sure that they will be fighting up the grid in just a few laps' time. Alan Will, we haven't been on board with them much this race, but they are running nicely in 6th at the moment. And Andrew and Rob still leading for the moment. So it looked like a little bit of understeer through Druids there almost. It looks like there's quite a lot of steering lock on. I'll try and catch that again if you see the car getting a little bit twitchy. Heading through Graham Hill. The Graham Hill bend. See the car really nearly reaching 12,000 RPM on the Cooper straight there. Yeah, it looks like he's having to turn quite a lot through 30s there. Just to make the car kind of follow a racing line. So I'm sure that they'll actually be wanting to... Maybe, I'm not quite sure how the tyres would last in this, to be honest. It's not a car I've commentated on or even driven before. See, 166 miles an hour pretty much down the Pilgrim's Drop as Greg and Will enter the pits. So we saw their rivals from before. So Andrew and John are in 2nd position at the moment. Meanwhile, the car putting pressure on them before is currently running 4th in the pits. So we have Luke and Ant running 15 laps down according to the timing screen. Not sure if that's a glitch, but if that is the case, that is unfortunately their hopes in this endurance event over, unfortunately. That would be impressive if it was 15 laps down, as we are 17 laps into the race. As we see a mistake creeping in there for Guy Sawbrick. At 30s, that means that they're still in 7th position for the moment. It's not the type of mistake that you want at the very start of the stint, obviously. If you're skidding across the track and into the gravel, you're picking up all types of rubbish and kind of wearing down the tyres a little bit. And maybe flat spotting them, and you will have to deal with that for the rest of your stint, unfortunately. As we see Greg and Will still in the pits for the moment. Here's Andrew and Rob out in front. That gap to the car behind has come down by about a second, half a second. So they're still extending this stint with some fairly good pace, it must be said. 164 miles an hour on the Pilgrim's Drop there. But as we have about 7 laps of the pit window left, and pretty much all of the drivers have now changed or performed a pit stop, with 2 mandatory driver changes for this event, they'll be probably looking to get in sooner rather than later. Alan and Will, previously 6th position, capitalising nicely on other people's pit stops and maybe a couple of mistakes that crept in. Running 4th at the moment as we have the race leaders, Andrew and Rob, now diving into the pits to perform their change. This will see Andrew and John, who I believe had already pitted, unless I'm mistaken, now pitting. No, perhaps they hadn't pitted. This will now see Alex and George, who have been running very nicely, very quickly indeed, putting pressure on the leaders at the start of the race, and having a very nice qualifying as well. Now in 1st position as we start lap 18. It looks like just outbraked himself just a tiny bit there, heading into Druids. Kept it on the tarmac though, so no harm done. As we have about 30 laps, 32 laps of this race remaining. See, a mistake for Alan and Will there creeping in. Just a little bit of oversteer on the on clearways. Actually, I'm not sure if that was out of Stirling. Looked quite far down almost because it didn't take them that long to get onto the Clark curve. Not quite sure what happened there. Maybe a little bit of contact. Yeah, it was an odd one. But they are still running 4th position for the moment as Guy Sawbrick has found himself back up into 5th. See a little bit of a lock-up coming in there. Of course, these cars, very old school. You've got no driver aids. And you will have to fight them because of that. So he's lost a little bit of time exiting Druids there as well. Hasn't lost position yet, and he's now unlapping himself past Andrew and John, heading through Surtees then. Meanwhile, Alex and George running very nicely indeed out in front, using about as much of the track as he dares there as we head onto Pilgrim's Rise. See, really on the curbs there. If you dip the car a bit too much, you're in the gravel, and it's going to upset the car quite a lot. As we have Andrew and Rob now leaving the pit box. In 3rd position. So now's the time where you want to get the tyres back up to their operating temperature. And you want to begin to find a rhythm, find a bit of clear space on the track to run in. And prepare yourself for the stint ahead. Seeing Alan and Will now promoted into 2nd position, with Alex and George still out in front. Of course, Alex and George running some very long stints today indeed, with George going for the full 25 laps. So we'll be running right to the end of the pit window. So it'll be interesting to see where they come out on track after they've extended this stint so long and everyone else has already made their pit stops, as we have some lap traffic that they are currently overtaking. In fact, that is Andrew and John running in 3rd at the moment. So we see a little bit of oversteer as he rides on the curb probably a bit too much, and it just upset the balance of the car ever so slightly through Druids. Meanwhile, Guy is heading through the clock curve now, with Alan and Will in 2nd out in front. He will be looking to unlap himself, I am sure. And very handy, almost kind of pit wall style, as we see a big error from Guy Strawbrick there, heading into the Pill Bend. I was about to say Hill Bend. Looks like he's managed to keep it facing the correct direction, but he hasn't, unfortunately. A little bit of overcorrection maybe as he ridden over the curb there. That saw him facing the wrong direction, and he will be now under pressure from the very quick Greg and Will that we saw earlier. As we head into Druids, then he looked very aggressive under the braking there, trying to hunt down. He's seen his prey kind of stumbling about just a little bit, heading through Paddock Hill. And he now knows he has got a fight on his hands to keep that 5th position. As Luke Wiggins and Anthony Gray, who are currently running, well, as we mentioned, currently running 9th, just set the fastest lap of the race at 1:23. Very nice from them indeed. But yeah, we've got some nice analysis, almost live from the pit wall, courtesy of Alex there, so thank you very much. They are currently pretty much a lap and a half on everyone up. Obviously, huge pit stops here, so they're trying to make good use of this stint. So they're running very nicely indeed. No one else is opting to use the same strategy that they're using. It's almost, I would have thought more people would have, and pitting early would have kind of been the alternate, but it looks like these guys are the only ones opting for it. So effectively about a lap and a half up, so it's played into Alex and George's hands, it must be said. We join the action then with Matt and Greg. So it looks like Greg has allowed a mistake to creep in, unfortunately, in that season. Just a couple of seconds behind. Especially Andrew and John just running just a tiny bit wide there, carrying a bit too much speed at this stage in the race as we are getting ever closer to halfway. So it looks like Matt, Guy Roberts, unfortunately allowed Greg to pass through Pilgrim's Drop. That slipstream would have been helping him ever so slightly there. Obviously, a huge amount of speed carried in that part of the track. But yeah, a little bit of understeer for Andrew and John there, and maybe a bit too much speed through Paddock Hill. So I'm dipping onto the gravel a little bit, but he kept it facing the correct direction. So not all is lost there. As we see Alex and George in the car at the moment for the final few laps of his stint, lapping the car of Guy Swarbrick there, getting the move done just in time down the Brabham Straight. But unfortunately, Guy will for him. There's contact between the two cars there. Guy was trying to unlap himself under braking there, and there has been contact between the two drivers entering Druids there. Not too much lost. Hopefully, no damage for either car involved there. George is coming in just a moment to make the driver swap, so I'm sure Alex and George will both be assessing in their heads whether now is the right time or not to think about repairs, if there are any. It doesn't look like there will be, though. It wasn't too big of a shunt. And it looks like he's thinking about a move under braking there through Hawthorne. A little bit of contact between the two again. Obviously, huge massive speed carry there. The stakes are very high under braking into Hawthorne, and mistakes are bound to creep in as we enter the halfway stage of this race now. See the revs hitting just above 12,000 RPM down clearways for Guy Swarbrick. But George has been unable to take that lap back again for the moment. So it looks like... I hope we haven't had a server issue. Not sure what's gone on there. The pit window is closed. And it's forced everyone into the pits. Apart from George, who has yet to have made the driver swap. Oh dear, what's happened there? That's an odd one, I'm sure. Let's stay with the action then with George, who's lapping nicely at the moment. He is not much pressure on the track at the moment, it must be said. He's found a nice bit of clear air, you know, obviously. He's found that quite easily, it must be said. A lot of speed there, 160 miles an hour, heading through Hawthorne. Yeah, I'm sure George can relax just a tiny bit for the moment. I'm not sure if this is planned. I will double check with the organiser if this was planned with the server, as we see people rejoining this server there. This may be a forced driver change of some description. That will be odd given that these drivers have already made a driver change, and we're only halfway in. I'm sure we'll get a line on what has happened there in just a moment. So we're just enjoying some quick laps from George as he enters the pits then to get ready for the driver swap. Alex Smith will be entering the car now. They've been running very nicely indeed, found themselves a nice little advantage. This will be a huge amount of time as they perform the driver swap, but they should still find themselves in a good position. So we have a car DNFing there. Yes, and it looks like, unfortunately, the driver swaps haven't been counted as pit stops. So, in those stops that we saw but a moment ago, kind of within that pit window, they didn't take tyres or fuel. And what has happened there is that the server has decided that no one's actually made a pit stop, although we saw drivers entering the pits, and has forced everyone into the pits. And we rejoin the action then with Alex and George. I'm presuming this is now Alex Smith in the car. Yeah, this is an odd little one. Such are the joys of virtual racing. Of course, it provides many benefits. Of course, you can drive whatever car you want. Do whatever you want, really. Pretty much within whatever is in the realms of technological possibility. But of course, you're also working with technology, and we have funny little issues such as this, as we are still watching who's now Alex Smith heading through Surtees and is making laps, making some serious laps, although the lap counter hasn't gone up. So just having word from the organisers that this has been a small error on the server side in terms of the game determining whether or not people have made pit stops or not, and what we will be doing is running a second 25 lap race with one driver change with no mandatory pit stops, and what we will do is we will have an aggregate result towards the end based on the running of the first part of this race and that second race coming up in just a moment. We'll be starting with the qualifying positions that we saw from qualifying earlier, and we'll be using aggregate results. So apologies for the error there, but it's been a good bit of racing, it must be said, so far in the first half, and we'll be joining you shortly for this second half now. So, welcome back to the action here at Brands Hatch. Apologies for the delay there and the errors that saw an end to the first 25 laps of the race. We are about a minute away from the second half of the event now. We've broken it up into two 25-minute stints following the errors there in the game, not believing that everyone had pitted when they had, and it in fact disqualified everyone. So, we are back with a race that doesn't have any mandatory pit stops. We still have a mandatory driver change to occur, though, at some point within this race set by us. So we will be ready to see how that plays out with the strategy. We've got 10 minutes, 10 seconds to go. We are ready to start the race, and this is in the quali order that we saw earlier on. The gantry is lit. And we are away. Bit of a delayed start. Oh dear, big error for Andrew and John there. That sees them off from third position. They'll be relegated to the bottom of the grid now, I can imagine. Hopefully they haven't taken anyone else out. It doesn't look like it. What a shame for them. They were running very well indeed. Alex and George, someone else. It is now Alex in the car who were running very nicely indeed. They were about 2 laps up on everyone else when the running came to a stop. So commiserations to them. They are now in 4th position for the moment. Luke and Ant have got a very nice start indeed. That sees them now in 1st position for the moment. Guy Swarbrick currently in 2nd with Alan and Will close behind in 3rd. Alex and George running in 4th then with Greg and Will in 5th. We saw them having some nice battles with Andrew and John earlier on in the race, but unfortunately for them, this second race hasn't started exactly how they would have wanted. It must be said, Alex and George have taken 3rd position then, down Pilgrim's Drop. Very nice indeed to get it done with quite so many cars occupying the same amount of tarmac there. Luke and Ant, meanwhile, have got nearly a 3-second gap on the first lap, so very good job to them indeed. This sets them up nicely. Of course, we will be doing aggregate results at the end of this race between the two events there. So it'll be interesting to see how the runners who are running high up in this race fare when we combine the results from the previous one. Colin and Steve in 8th position as they were at the start of the previous race. Andrew and John have had, well, their fortunes have turned around, it must be said, currently running 7th with about 6 seconds to catch the car in front, although they did have quite a large gap in time to catch following an error they had early on in the first race, and they managed to make it work. So let's see how they do in the second one. About 4 seconds, meanwhile, out in front for Luke and Ant, as Greg and Will and Alex swap positions there. As we see a small lock-up coming in from Guy Swarbrick there, that leaves him vulnerable to Andrew and Rob closely behind. As we have a swap for position between Greg and Will and Alex and George. Looks like, in fact, Guy Swarbrick's been able to pass down Pilgrim's Drop. Must be scrubbed off quite a bit of speed there for Greg and Will, although they were 162 miles an hour through a speed trap there, so they've gained that right back and will be putting pressure back on Guy Swarbrick as we head into the later stages of lap 2. I say lap 2, this is actually about lap 27, of course. I imagine all the wear and the tyres and fuel, etc. have been removed from the cars, so it will feel like lap 2, but of course this is technically lap 27. As unfortunately for Guy Swarbrick, an error has allowed a few cars to get past there, including Andrew and John, as they go side by side down clearways now, heading towards Clark Curve. And a little bit of a lock-up for Guy, pretty much leaving the door open for Andrew and John behind. He will stay in the slipstream just a little bit. Has an explore around the outside of Paddock Hill, and very brave on the breakers. We're watching Andrew and Rob having a bit of oversteer as they had at the start of the race there. Has that collected Guy Swarbrick? It hasn't. Very good of Guy to avoid that there. Bit of a pretty much a bus stop in the middle of this circuit from Andrew and Rob. We saw that at the start of their stints in the previous race, and it's happened again. That promotes Andrew and John up into 5th now, so running nicely following the mistake at the start of the race. About 4 seconds still for Luke and Ant out in front. This has gone exactly how they would have wanted. I'm sure they're very happy with that indeed. Meanwhile, we have Alex and George. I was looking for the names there. Running in 3rd at the moment. So from 2 laps up to 3rd position at the moment. It's not exactly how they wanted the start of the second race to have gone, but still on for a very good result regardless. See a very quick lap from Alan and Will at 1:24.5. Not the quickest we've seen. We've seen a 1:23 already so far in this race. But Alex and George now finding themselves in the podium positions. So they have had, as I mentioned just a moment ago, not the worst start possible. Not what they would have wanted, but they are shortly putting pressure on Alan and Will as we are on lap 4 of the 25 remaining laps. We see Andrew and John putting pressure on Greg and Will as we head through Sheens and into Sterling's. We'll be enjoying that slipstream down clearways then as we head towards the clock curve. See the car just gaining ever so slightly. If he's brave under braking, he'll put some immense pressure on. He's been a little bit safer than we've seen from some drivers so far. As we saw a very good move from Andrew and John in the first start of the race to get a move done on the outside under braking. And 1:24.4, so nearly a second quicker for Andrew and John on that lap to the car in front. See, as we head into Druids then, under braking, he's put it on the outside, but he's got to dip back in. Unfortunately, he wasn't quite out ahead enough for his liking. As we head through Graham Hill, he has in fact eked out in front ever so slightly. It looked like for a second there, but it hasn't stuck. They're going to be side by side through Surtees, and he's brave under braking. Gets a move done under braking. A little bit of contact was involved there. I don't think that was advantage by contact. But as we head through Pilgrim's Drop, then Greg and Will do have a chance to fight back in the slipstream. So we've seen moves done around the outside here, quite a lot so far. That won't be the case this time around, though. I'm just noticing Luke and Ant now nearly 10 seconds out in front, 5 laps in. Found some very good pace indeed. And unfortunately, a mistake for Alan and Will sees Alex and George right on their tail then, as we head onto clearways. Lights still running for Alan and Will. Unfortunately, we won't be getting the sunset we were expecting earlier on. So those lights are not entirely... 1:22.8 from Luke and Ant out in front. That's very good running indeed. Just leaving the competition behind. I'm not sure if a driver change has been involved there, or if they've just found some immense pace after having a bit of a breather while we waited for the second half of the running to start. Yes, Alex putting pressure on Alan and Will then. Heading through the Graham Hill bend. It's dipped off just a little bit following the exit through Druid. He was putting some pressure on earlier on before, but heading through Surtees. The door's open just a little bit on that inside line there, and he's now in fact going to enjoy the slipstream heading down Pilgrim's Drop, so we should see gaining nice. We saw the move going around the outside under braking through Hawthorne, and I imagine he's going to try and replicate that again, as it looks like almost Alan and Will were almost trying to defend that outside line, but unfortunately for them ran a little bit too wide, dipped onto the grass, but unfortunately so have Alex and George. So I'll have a mistake if you have a mistake, says Alex and George, and they have now swapped back around again and are in third position. They almost gifted the position, but they decided to give it back. Heading onto clearways, they are still behind Alan and Will in second position, and they're going to head into clock curve just ever so slightly behind now. Meanwhile, behind, the gap between Andrew and Greg has extended out just a little bit, but pretty much posting identical lap times. Second and third position at 1:23.7 from Andrew and John. Very quick lap time indeed. But you just see there just how much battling slows you down in these endurance events. It's something that you do want to try and avoid if you can, but unfortunately for the drivers, but fortunately for us, we're getting to see some very good battles indeed. It's about 7/10 now heading through the Graham Hill bend, as a little bit too much grass for Alex and George taken there. And you can just see just how much battling has slowed them down. It's now not too far off for Andrew and John. Soon they're going to be involved in this fight. We're going to have a three-way fight for second position. podium positions will be changing around lots then. Matt and Guy, after leading so much of the previous race, currently running in 7th position, with a nice bit of clear air for them to enjoy for the moment. Of course, we will be having the long driver stops, which are still mandatory. The pits are no longer mandatory, which solves our issue that we had in the first half of the race, but we are still expecting a driver swap at some point in this race. And of course, with no mandatory pits, we won't have a designated pit window, so it will be completely in the team's hands when they choose to make that stop. About a second now between Alan and Will and Alex and George. That fight, that pressure they were putting on is starting to release just a little bit. Maybe Alex has realised that they are just losing a bit too much time in that battle, and he should focus on defending this 3rd position for the moment, because they're still on for a very good result as it stands, once we account the results from the previous race, with 2 laps up towards the end of the first 25 laps. This battling, in fact, has allowed Luke and Nat to just walk away with it. It must be said, we saw a 1:22 being set by them before. Very good lap time indeed, and now about 15 seconds out in front. See them through the speed trap there, about 157 miles an hour. Not the quickest that we've seen, so maybe they're carrying a bit more downforce than everyone else, and that is playing into their hands, perhaps, as we've seen those very fast 1:22s coming in. I was forgetting to mute my mic while I just grab a quick refreshment, as we are quite far into, we're about 33 laps into the 50. Of course, the 200 kilometres, about a fifth of the actual running that would have happened back in 1970s with these cars. So times this by 5 pretty much, and you've got an idea of just how much these cars and these drivers are put through. About 250 laps of Brands Hatch in these Tipo 33 cars. Tubular frame chassis was a pretty radical concept back then. Of course, we first saw it really pioneered on the Maserati birdcage of the 50s. But some pretty radical concepts on this car as well, as we see Luke and Ant coming across the first bit of lap traffic. Of course, they'll have to fight for this. This being an endurance event, and it looks pretty easy though, down Pilgrim's Drop. Some great sportsmanship between the drivers there. Heading through Hawthorne. As we have a swap for position, with Guy Swarbrick overtaking Andrew and Rob as they enter the pits now for their driver change. The first driver change of the second half of the race then. 10 laps in pretty much. So let's see if this triggers a kind of a domino effect of drivers rushing in, as they basically now have a 15-lap sprint race after the drivers are in and this pit stop is made. Of course, they can choose to not put tyres and fuel in now that a pit stop isn't mandatory. So it will just be possibly a quick as possible driver change, and they will either try and nurse the car home or just have a blazing 15 laps if possible, as the leaders set a 1:24. Meanwhile, there is a bit of a battle. This battle that we mentioned before is now hotting up, as Alex tries to defend from Andrew and John. Alex actually setting their quickest lap of this second race so far, but it's not enough, unfortunately. And as we head down Pilgrim's Rise, under braking into Druids, Andrew and John do get the overtake done. A lot of contact was involved there. Luckily, both drivers keeping it on track. But in Druids, there quite a bit of contact and a very, very close battle for third position there. And now Alex will be putting pressure on to Andrew and John as we head through Surtees. It looks like the car looks a little bit unsettled, kind of attacking all the curbs. Not as hard as you dare there, really. And a little bit of a gap has now built up between second, third and fourth position. Of course, this has now freed Andrew and John to now put pressure on Alan and Will out in front. And now about half a second separating those two. So Andrew and John found some very nice pace indeed in this second race. The second race has not gone the way that Alex and George would have wanted. Unfortunately for them, they had some very good running at the start, and unfortunately a very good strategy as well. And unfortunately it hasn't played out for them in this kind of compressed second race. So we have another car in the pits. Andrew and Rob actually exiting the pits, pardon me. They will exit in last, about a lap down on the car out in front, but of course the long driver changes are to blame for that. And Will have defended well so far as we headed to Druids. We saw Andrew and John sort of getting an overtake done last time through Druids, and it won't happen this time around as there's lapped traffic to contend with as well. There's a lot of cars occupying the Graham Hill bend there. A little bit of contact maybe between the drivers there. Hopefully not too much damage on Andrew and John's car, although it doesn't look like it with the pace that they have at the moment. As we head through Surtees, Alan and will get to benefit from the slipstream of the lapped car out in front, but of course that slipstream effect is amplified for Andrew and John, the car behind, as they are pretty much side by side through Pilgrim's Drop and into Hawthorne. He's going to be brave under braking, try and get them moved on the outside, but Alan will respond there on the inside, try and put a little bit of pressure on, but unfortunately it's not quite enough. And heading into Westfield then, it is Andrew and John in second position. Very nice set of corners for Andrew and John there as we see that lapped car out in front. Just getting it just a little bit wrong and luckily not re-entering the track and affecting anyone else's race. But in fact all this battling and the chaos that we saw at the start of this lap has allowed Alex and George to catch back up to Alan and Will, who are now fighting to keep the bottom spot of the podium. As we head down Clearways then, having a little bit of an explore are Alex and George. Is Alex in the car at the moment? I must keep reminding myself of that as we head onto the Bradman Straight. They have backed off just a tiny bit. And as we head towards the Paddock Hill bend, it is going to be very close indeed as he looks to have a bit of a dive under brakes there, but has to concede the position for now as we have some other cars pitting. It is Guy Swarbrick in the pits, changing back to Matt Daly in the car, and it is Colin and Steve also in the pits at the moment. As we see Alan Will just about keeping Alex and George, Alex in the car, just about keeping Alex behind for the moment. We're about halfway in to this second half of running then. And the drivers, we talked before about the drivers kind of finding a rhythm, finding their own bit of clear air to driving, and perhaps arguably one of the benefits for us watching of this compressed running is they still haven't found that kind of bit of clear space, that bit of rhythm. They haven't had the opportunity to, because 10 laps in they've got to dive into the pits to make that driver change. So it is, although it's not ideal, I must say it's kind of almost hotted the action up a bit. Really, it's been very enjoyable to watch indeed for myself, and I hope you've enjoyed watching as well. And of course we have some of the team members as well watching on with eagle eyes to make sure that running is going well for their respective teams. So good luck to you guys out there if you are about to make your driver change, or if you have just made your driver change. I hope you enjoyed that stint of racing there. As we see Andrew and John having fought for that second position coming in for the pits, followed closely behind by Alan and Will and Alex and George. So we're now going to have a bit of a battle in the pits. Who can get their driver changes made as quickly as possible? We'll see who can get themselves onto the podium. This is going to be an interesting bit of driver action going on here as Matt and Guy exit the pit. It is Matt Daly back in the car now, currently running 6th, about 2 laps down, with second position Greg and Will for company at the moment. Luke and Anne still out in front by a huge margin now, with everyone else having made pit stops. They're running very nicely indeed. Almost kind of echoing what we saw from Alex and George in race 1, where they're just kind of setting some very good laps, kind of building that gap out in front and allowing everyone else to enjoy the chaos of the pit lane and then diving into the pits when they choose. Of course, we didn't actually get to see much of that from Alex and George, as by the time they made their pits, pretty much the race was over. We now see Luke and Ant diving into the pits, and it's Andrew and John who are out of the pits first off. So they did a very impressive bit of driving to get themselves up into second, and they're currently only running. They've only lost a position in that long pit stop, as we see the revs riding a very good camera angle, about 11,000 RPM. So they are, looks like they're almost short shifting, trying to get into a high gear in preparation for the corner out in front. As we see Alan, is that, no, pardon me, I thought Matt was in the pits again for a second. Colin and Steve, Alan and Will, and Alex and George are our cars in the pit lane at the moment. Of course, Alan and Will and Alex and George were very close together as they entered the pits. So it'll all be down to who exits first now. It's Greg and Will who have currently assumed the lead. Our previous leaders, Luke and Ant, in second position for the moment. Alex and John, Andrew and John will be trying to set some very quick laps to try and capitalise on the time that the race leaders have spent in the pits. But of course they had a huge margin, so it'll be interesting to see how much that shrinks by. And it is Alan and Will out of the pits first. It is Alan and Will out of the pits, and they will secure that spot on the podium for the moment, or kind of what is the assumed spot on the podium. Although, must be said, Alex is now George in the car, running not too far behind. The gap's extended a little bit, but not too much. Of course, the gap has extended hugely between Alan and Andrew. They had a very quick pit stop. And that sees them about a lap up. And a nice bit of breathing space for them now to run in those podium spots. See, Matt Daly setting lots of green and purple sectors on his, what will be out, it'd be his first quick lap. His last lap was his out lap. And Andrew and Rob setting their personal best of this second race so far, a 1:24.1. As we see Matt Daly setting a very quick lap there, a 1:23.7. Running over the curbs there. We're about to see some good pace from the number 20 car now, I feel. You see he climbs back up the order. Still have Greg and Will in the pits for the moment, as we see a car exiting the pits there. Is that Colin and Steve? As we see Alex and George running very quickly indeed. He's now right on the behind of Alan and Will as we head through Paddock Hill Bend. They will assume fourth position for the moment. They'll retain fourth position rather, as a little bit of a lockup comes in for George there as we head into Druid. He's got the inside line there. Alan and Will have kind of left the door open a little bit as we head into Graham Hill Bend. He wasn't quite as brave on the brakes as he would have wanted to be, and has allowed Alan to take the position back as we head down the Cooper Straight now and into Surtees. It is Alex and George who have the position. This will, in fact, Alan and Will are going to get a very good exit indeed. And I was about to talk about a slipstream. There's a bit of contact between the two drivers there. They're about to be side by side, heading down Pilgrim's Drop. And Alan and Will, very brave under braking there, get it move done through Hawthorne Bend. And heading into Westfield Bend, then they are defending hard from Alex and George. As we have the current race leaders, Greg and Will, in the pits. That means Andrew and John can start once again, setting some very quick laps and try to gain as well as they can. They're running very nicely in the first half of the running, and hopefully we will see that pace continue. So Alex and George then heading through Clark Curve onto the Brabham Straight. Alex and George are going to be enjoying a slipstream. It's George in the car at the moment, using about as much track as he dares there. The tyres very nearly touching the grass on the side there as we head through Paddock Hill Bend. He doesn't try anything too dangerous, too brave, and he might wait for a move to be done. Into Druid. He looked at it, he looked at the inside of the braking there, and there's been contact, big contact unfortunately. He looks like he span round. Alan and Will have span round unfortunately. I'm not sure if he just wasn't quite moving at the pace that Alex and George were expecting. However, that does now see it now sees George in third position. Bit of contact unfortunately there for Alan and Will. They haven't lost out too much. That gap can easily be made up in the remaining 10 laps of this race. But yeah, George was very brave to explore that move down the inside of Druids. We've seen a lot of that from that car so far. Very brave under braking. Some very good racing indeed in a long event like this. So it's Andrew and John who have assumed the lead for the moment after that very good pit stop and the very good pace that we saw at the start. About 160 miles an hour down Pilgrim's Drop there. Some very good pace indeed. Of course, these cars capable of excess 200 miles an hour. Oh, as we see, a lot of understeer. A lot of understeer through Westfield for Alex and George. You don't want too many of those mistakes, because it will allow the cars behind to catch up nicely, because they add up. Although we do only have 10 minutes of this race remaining. It's pretty much a sprint race from here on out. Although pretty much, I'm not sure if that pit stop was so quick, maybe they opted to not put on any tyres or fuel. Maybe they had, although I don't imagine any driver put on fuel with 25 laps remaining. Maybe that was a tyre deficit that we saw. In fact, we now have We have Greg and somewhere. Greg and Will currently running 4th position. A lap down from the leader, as we see a lock up into Druids there. Oh, we see a bit of oversteer on the exit of Druids for Andrew and Rob there. Looks like they managed to keep it out of the wall just about. Managed to get the car moving. Very quick lap there from Colin and Steve, a 1:23. I didn't quite catch the end of that, unfortunately. But that gap between Alex and George and Alan and Will just building ever so slightly now. We saw some very good pace from them in race 1, and we've seen some very good pace from not only Alex and George, but a lot of the other drivers as well. Some very good driving been on display here so far. Some very good action for an endurance event, actually. Of course, not the longest endurance event in the world, 50 laps, 200 kilometres. The real one back in the 70s was 1,000 kilometres. Obviously, this Alfa taking the win. 50th anniversary of that win here tonight. So this is a very competent race car for its time indeed. Alex and George eating into that gap to the front then, as Matt Daly sets a 1:23.5. Very nice lap there, as he makes up the deficit that was grown during the pit. Yeah, Alex and George finding some good time out of the car in front now, about 57 seconds separating them. We saw that was about a minute at the end of the previous lap. It's Andrew and John who they are looking to catch up for. Andrew and John, of course, themselves having some very good pace as we saw at the first half of this 25 laps. I've just had word from the organisers that the pit stops were in fact fixed time pit stops, and that they have been cut short perhaps by certain runners. I am not naming names, not causing any speculation, but if you would like to watch what's currently going on screen. Yeah, some penalties may be in waiting for anyone who has been cutting pit stops short, so that could affect the results yet. I imagine the stewards will be working quite hard towards the end of this race, working out results from aggregate and including penalties. As we see a quick lap from Greg and Will there, a 1:25, the fastest of the 25 laps so far. Oh, pardon me, it won't be the 25 laps, it will be since the driver change. But Alex and George running nicely, 45 seconds now separating them and the leader. As the time seems to be kind of running away for Andrew and John there, it must be said. About 1:35 for the previous lap. I'm not sure there was a mistake involved there. Now about 43 seconds for Alex and George. But Alan and Will are close behind them, it must be said. About 8 seconds, 18 laps into this stint. And they are, well, not into the stint, into this race. There's a pretty clear distinction, it must be said, between the leaders and the cars who have struggled so far in the second half of this race. Some very good pace on display on the podium at the moment. As Matt Daly in the car at the moment is currently hunting down Andrew and Rob, who are currently on clearways. About 4 seconds now separating them. You see the car coming into view for Matt Daly there. In just a moment there will be pressure on the car out in front. As we have Luke and Ant in the pits at the moment. Matt Daly setting a very good lap there, 1:24. These lap times are starting to drop and drop as the fuel loads get lighter. Now 35 seconds between George and the leader at the moment. 162 miles an hour through the speed trap for George. That car is running along very nicely indeed. Some great pace on display this evening. And it looks like we are actually starting to catch a little bit of sunset. It probably won't be a full sunset, but we'll see at the end of this 25 laps, see the light starting to dim ever so slightly. Looks very pretty here at Brands Hatch today. Now about half a minute between Andrew and John and Alex and George, and it must be said Andrew and John look to be fighting the car a little bit. And they look like they have a car behind. It's Colin and Steve who are looking to unlap themselves as we head through Surtees now. Taking the inside there, and they're going to be side by side pretty much down Pilgrim's Drop. And that looked very easy for Colin and Steve. It must be said, maybe Andrew and John carrying a lot of damage, perhaps. I was thinking, oh dear, yeah, our car is not behaving how they want. I was about to say maybe a lot of downforce, or maybe the setup's not quite working how they would have wanted, but 140 miles an hour through the speed trap there, that's not totally normal, and it looks like the car is all of a sudden becoming a bit of a handful. There's now about 27 seconds separating them and the leader. Sorry, them and Alex and George. And the gap between Matt Daly and Andrew and Rob has come down just a little bit more. Now about 2 seconds, 3 seconds separating them as we head down the Cooper Straight with Andrew and Rob, who are in fact not too far off Greg and Will. We've seen some good pace from Greg and Will so far, at one point leading. But yeah, Andrew and John remaining in the 133s. It's allowing Alex and George, and by proxy Alan and Will, to just slowly reel them in. And we'll now have about 5 laps remaining at this pace. Alex and George driving the car at the moment, will be putting some huge amount of pressure on Andrew and John at the very last part of this race. So after all 200 kilometers, it could come down to the very final laps. I'm looking forward to this finale very much indeed. I hope you are as well. As we have a bit of a train forming in this battle for 4th position. Greg and Will currently leading that, but towing the cars along are Greg and Will, with Andrew and Rob catching them ever so slightly, with about 4/10 quicker that lap. But Matt Daly in an absolute league of his own, about 2 seconds faster than the car in front of him on that previous lap there. So Andrew and Rob are maybe thinking that they want to kind of abandon their hopes of chasing down Greg and Will and start planning a defence against a very quick Matt Daly. About a second separating Matt Daly and Andrew and Rob. See an immense amount of speed through Pilgrim's Drop there for Matt Daly, heading through Hawthorne Bend there. Just like the car was rocketing towards the car out in front. Speaking of the car out in front, we have Andrew and John still holding the lead for now, but Alex and George setting his fastest lap so far in the 24s. Now about 15 seconds separating them. He has got some lap traffic to contend with, however. And it's Luke and Ant. Luke and Ant, who at one point, I believe, Luke and Ant were leading the race at one point. Not sure what's happened there. It's now got them down as 12 laps behind. What a shame that hasn't worked out for them. But Matt is hot on the heels of Andrew and Rob out of a big lockup for Greg and Will. That won't be helping their hopes of defending 4th at all. But as we watch Matt Daly through Paddock Hill Bend, just class act under braking there. Made it look easy. And that's not easy at all through that corner. And through Druids, then he's now beginning to put pressure on Greg and Will for 4th position. See Greg and Will using quite a bit of the curb there. About a 10th separating him and Matt. Matt opting to go around the outside of Surtees. Looked for a second there. He did dive onto the inside, however. He has got a slipstream to enjoy down Pilgrim's Drop, however. They're pretty much side by side, pretty much neck and neck. Matt Daly eking out in front just a little bit. Who's going to be braver under braking? It's going to be Matt Daly. He's going to secure 4th position through Hawthorne Bend. Very well deserved there. 4th position for Matt Daly. He does, however, have quite the defence on his, to build up now. See the cars cutting about as much curb as they dare there. Now about 6 seconds between Alex and George and the leader. He set a very quick lap on his previous lap as well. The lap time starting to really come down now as the fuel loads get lighter. See it in the rearview mirror, quite an intimidating sight of some endurance cars hunting Matt Daly down, or trying to hunt down Matt Daly as we head on to They grab him straight though. He's moving about under the straight to I don't set himself up for the paddock hill bend there. Now about 4 seconds separating Alex and George and Andrew and John. As we see, yeah, the car's starting to become a real handful for Andrew and John there. A lot of oversteer, and he's in the gravel. He's in the gravel. Unfortunately, I think that might be him losing the lead. Yes, it is. He has conceded the lead to George, who now takes first position. After that mistake, it just looks like he's battling that car with all of his skill, all of everything he can do within his power to keep the car on the track. And unfortunately, he's starting to run out of options as we head into the final couple of laps of this race then. He has conceded second position. Alex and George now in the lead. They had led with a 2-lap advantage in the first half of the racing, and it looks like if everything goes their way in the final couple of laps, they will be on for a very good result in this race indeed. Alan and Wilbur now be fancying their chances for second then, following how the past couple of laps have gone for Andrew and John. Looks like the challenge from Andrew and Rob hasn't quite worked out so far against Greg and Will. Greg and Will finding some good pace, about 1.5 seconds down for Andrew and Rob there. Well, Matt Daly is still just enjoying himself in the 123s there. And Andrew and John have managed to keep it around the 4 or 5 second gap between them and the car out in front, so if they nurse it home, they might be okay for a second position. Of course, a huge part of endurance racing is treating the tyres, treating the car well, and it's not absolute lap pace, although for Matt, try telling Matt Daly that. He has just been setting some absolute flyers for the past 10 or so laps. We're actually on now the penultimate lap with Alex and George. Alex was mentioning before he was a bit down in the dumps, as he rightfully would be, as to how race 1 had gone, and unfortunately had the errors that saw us having to restart the race pretty much halfway through, but I'm sure he'll be very relieved given what's currently on screen at the moment. It is George currently in the lead with about 9 seconds now to the car behind. He has forced his way through the field, obviously demonstrating that amazing pace in race 1 that found them with a 2-lap advantage, and they've currently got a 10-second advantage in the lead once again as we head through Pilgrim's Drop. And as we head to the end of this 25 laps, obviously everyone kind of now finding their space on track. I would say everyone bar and unfortunately I've just lost my screen there. It's back now. Well, that was a interesting one. Andrew and John, I'd say they have now just trying to fight to bring that car home. If they don't lose 6 seconds or make a huge error, they can still bring home second. It's now, I think that's now the best possible result for this race, unless we see something huge from Alex and George, but I doubt that is going to happen. George has been running very nicely indeed during his stint. In fact, we're going to stay with George as we start the final lap of this 200 kilometres then. Yes, and of course we consider as well the fact that this is George's first race with us, so this is a very impressive performance from him indeed to recover it back up into the lead for the moment as we head through Graham Hill Bend with George then. See, Andrew and John about 7 seconds a lap slower than Alan and Will that time round. Now only about 3 seconds separating them. They're coming into view. Matt Daly setting his best lap so far, a 1:23.3. With a few more laps, he would have been in contention for a decent podium finish as well. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it is to be unless we have some contact between these two drivers here. 160 miles an hour through the Hawthorne Bend for George there then. Now about 1.5 seconds separating Alan and Andrew meanwhile, as they themselves head through the Pilgrim's Drop and into Hawthorne. We've seen this go quite wrong for Andrew and John in the past. They managed to keep it on the tarmac this time round, being a bit more conservative on, with the car perhaps, to just try and keep hold of that second position, but we are going to stay with George as he heads through the Clark Curve and onto the Brabham Straight for a very, very well-deserved victory. Well done to Alex and George for taking the win here at the 50th anniversary 200 kilometers of Brands Hatch event. Very well-deserved victory indeed, and it is going to be very close indeed. There's contact as we head into the Clark Curve. Contact between Alan and Will, and Andrew and John. It looked like they'd almost kept second position for the moment then. Can they get the car across the line in time? They're now going to try and have to battle to keep the podium position away from Matt Daly. Very close finish towards the end of this 200 kilometres then. Alan and Will take home that second position, and it looks like just at the very end there, Andrew and John have been able to keep that third position. It was so close, pretty much neck and neck. There's a lot of contact was involved at the very end of that lap there. Some very exciting action towards the very end of that race. Well done to Andrew and John for fighting that car to the very end there by the looks of things. Unfortunately got a little bit messy towards the end there, but Matt would have been looking extremely, extremely happy as he saw Andrew and John facing the wrong direction. But unfortunately it wasn't to be for him, that bottom spot of the podium. We'll stay with George as he enjoys his victory lap there. All the drivers have in fact now crossed the line. See, Alan Will just taking a quick break on the side of the track there in the grass. In second, we'll have some victory donuts, I believe. So we'll be coming on for a little bit of a parade lap. I hope that'll be cool. So the order then, as George comes to the end of his parade lap, we have Alex and George taking home first position, Alan and Will taking home second, Andrew and John taking home third, Matt and Guy taking home fourth, Greg and Will taking home fifth, Andrew and Rob taking home sixth, Colin and Steve taking home seventh, and Luke and Ant taking home eighth. As we finish this parade lap, of course, we do have aggregate results to consider. We will take into consideration the results from the first part of the race. That was an exciting 200 kilometers here at Brands Hatch. I certainly enjoyed watching it. I hope you did as well. Very well done indeed to all of the teams involved. Some impressive racing, some very good strategies coming through there, and you can all pat yourselves on the back for that event there. Well, that will be all from me for now. We will see you in a week's time as we start the second half of the year's running with the single-seater and the TCR events. I will see you in a week's time. I hope you've enjoyed this event very much.